The night over Babylon stretched like an endless black tapestry, the Euphrates drifting slowly, like the lifeblood of an empire too confident, too comfortable upon its throne. On the towering walls, nearly 10 meters high, guards paced with torches flickering like fireflies in the dark. Unaware they were standing on the edge of history. The once mighty kingdom that had forced nations to bow now glowed only with the dim red embers of fading pride. Warm, but not strong enough to burn away the fate approaching from beyond the desert. In the far distance, where sand and darkness fused into a blurred horizon, another force crept forward. Silent, patient, sharp as a blade pressed against the throat of a sleeping giant. It was the Persian army of Cyrus the Great, a man whose ambition was large enough to swallow fortresses whole. In the silver glint of his eyes, Babylon was not an eternal citadel. Only a door that had yet to open. Desert winds swept through the encampment, carrying the faint clash of steel and muffled commands, like the weary sigh of an era seconds away from eruption. Inside Babylon, festivals raged on. Music and wine dulled the senses. Torchlight shimmered against the statue of Marduk like molten gold sliding down stone. No one knew the river was being drained, slowly, deliberately, like blood slipping out of the empire's veins. The battle had not begun, yet the night felt longer than any before it. As if history had already placed a lit fuse at the foot of Babylon's walls, unheard by those it would destroy. The city still laughed, but outside the earth trembled faintly, as if destiny itself was approaching. Just one more moment, and the city once deemed unassailable would cease to be the center of the world, becoming instead a battlefield where steel, sand, and blood would fuse into a new chapter written in fire. Before Persian spears touched the bed of the Euphrates, before Babylon's mighty walls became as useless as an empty shell, the ancient world had drifted through years like a wounded beast unaware of the blood running down its own hide. From the east, a new name rose like the first red sun piercing the darkness of the Near East: Cyrus II. Cyrus the Great, the man who united the Persian and Median tribes to forge an empire unlike anything before it. He emerged from the harsh Zagros mountains with a temperament unsoftened by stone and unyielding to steel. Within 2 decades, Cyrus crushed wealthy Croesus of Lydia, extended his reach across Asia Minor, and turned once proud city-states into mere entries on his imperial ledger. Persia expanded like fire meeting dry forest, every victory an axe blow to the long-standing pride of the ancient West. But the hunger of an empire never stops at its borders. To the southwest remained one final name, one city thought unconquerable: Babylon. Babylon at the time was not merely a capital, it was a monument to power. Walls over 20 meters thick and towering like sky barriers encircled by the Euphrates, which wound through the city like a colossal guardian serpent. Since Hammurabi's era, Babylon had been a center of scholarship, trade, astronomy, and architecture. The home of the legendary hanging gardens, of ziggurats stabbing upward like stairways to the divine. While Cyrus was still forging his first swords in the valleys of Iran, Babylon controlled grain, water, taxes, the lifeblood of Mesopotamia. Gold poured into its vaults, crowds filled its streets, its walls seemed to laugh at anyone who dared approach, and its king, Nabonidus, believed the empire was unassailable. But history does not stand still. It stores pressure like a furnace preparing to burst. Nabonidus was no king of the people. He elevated the moon god Sin above Marduk, Babylon's own guardian deity. Priests seethed, the citizens whispered with discontent, and the foundation of power shook like a tree whose roots had rotted. During his 10-year absence in the Arabian oasis of Taima, Babylonians had grown accustomed to the rule of his son Belshazzar, who governed in his place. The kingdom was rich but hollow, splendid but tired. This was Babylon before 539 BCE, an empire so large no one imagined it could fall, yet already decaying from within. Persia saw Babylon the way a tiger watches an aging bull. Cyrus knew that capturing it would redraw the map from Egypt to India. Trade routes, the grain fields of Mesopotamia, the strategic crossroads of ancient empires, all lay behind that fortified gate. But Babylon's defenses were colossal. Walls so wide 2 chariots could race atop them, bronze gates, watchtowers, and the Euphrates itself flowing through the city like an unbreachable moat. Babylonian armies were many, wealthy, powerful, but complacent. Belshazzar believed that simply closing the gates and laughing from the ramparts would keep Persia out for 10 years if needed. Cyrus did not laugh. He listened, observed, waited. And then the chance arrived like a blade slipping through silk. Nabonidus was absent. Babylon's soldiers trusted their walls more than their people. And the great festival of Marduk approached, a night of wine and music, when warriors set their swords aside and torchlight burned brighter on banquet tables than on the battlements. Cyrus understood that to take Babylon, he did not need to smash the walls like a hammer breaking stone. He needed to remove the Euphrates from the heart of the city. In the autumn of 539 BCE, Persian forces advanced to Opis, the northern gateway on the Tigris. A brutal battle erupted. Blood stained the riverbanks like red ink across a map. Babylon's army broke. The northern defenses collapsed. Nabonidus fled back toward his capital. Yet Cyrus did not assault the gates. He knew Babylon had food stores for years, and a long siege would only waste lives. The key was not the walls. It was what Babylon believed immortal: the river. Cyrus ordered a massive canal to be dug to divert the Euphrates. Thousands of soldiers wielded picks, shovels, and bare hands. Night after night, sand filled their eyes. Blood tore from their fingertips. But the canal opened inch by inch like a wound across the desert. Gradually, the Euphrates began to recede, its water slipping away from Babylon like life draining from a body. The walls still stood, the gates still shut. But the river, Babylon's pride, was becoming a muddy road leading straight into the city's core. The world outside did not yet know, but death had already crawled beneath the walls. Inside, Babylonians feasted, pouring wine down their throats as though forgetting their gods were turning their backs. On the 12th of Tishri, October 539 BCE, dawn broke without wind. The diversion canals were complete. The river flowed away from Babylon like blood leaving a heart. No screams, no siege engines. Only the river lowering inch by inch, its pulse fading. When the Euphrates dropped to knee height, Persian soldiers waded through its bed, entering Babylon like phantoms. No need to storm the gate. No need to climb the walls. They simply walked beneath them. Through the riverbed no one had ever imagined could be crossed. Babylon, proud for 1,000 years, had no breach in its walls. So Cyrus made the river itself his doorway. No trumpets, no great inferno. Just an empire losing its breath while drunk on its own glory. And from that moment, Persia stepped onto Babylon's stone floors as its new heir, not its destroyer. The battle did not need to continue. The river had already changed course, and history moved forward like a blade still warm from victory. The Euphrates still flowed, but it no longer carried the proud echo of Babylon. It ran low and thin, like the fading breath of an empire that once believed itself immortal. As the riverbed sank, war shifted into a new form. No longer 2 armies clashing on an open plain, but a hunt silent as the night itself. Cyrus did not hurl himself at the walls like a blood-hungry fool. He orchestrated a campaign that resembled a surgical operation, cutting the artery rather than smashing the chest. And to understand why this strike was no mere luck, we must look at how the 2 engines of war faced each other in the shadows of 539 BCE. One alert, one lost in illusion. The Persian army under Cyrus numbered roughly 50,000 to 60,000, divided into units organized by the decimal system: tens, hundreds, thousands, 10,000s. This structure was not just organization, it was a spine. At its core stood the Immortals, the elite 10,000-man force clad in stiff quilted armor overlaid with metal scales, carrying round shields, short spears, and long bows. Each soldier had an immediate replacement. If one fell, another stepped in without delay. Their ranks were never recorded as diminished. Immortal, True to the name, they never visibly thinned in the eyes of the enemy. Behind them came the light cavalry, horsemen from the Iranian plateau, masters of firing arrows while galloping, slipping through openings in infantry formations with lethal precision. Cyrus's art of war was not about raw impact. It was about rhythm, swift, flexible, shifting like water threading through stone. If Persia was the sharpened blade, Babylon was the heavy shield, proud, thick, and slow. The city had a large force, with many sources estimating more than 50,000 defenders, most stationed inside the city and others at Tigris outposts such as Sippar. Babylonian archers were famed throughout Mesopotamia. Their bronze armor was sturdy, their spears long, their tower shields imposing. But Babylon had one weakness no amount of metal could cover: their unshakable belief that they could not fall. Their walls were high, but their confidence was higher. After defeats at Opis and Sippar, many outposts collapsed without enough alarm. The people believed that closing the gates meant safety. For centuries, Babylon had lived behind walls, and the world had kneeled outside them. Cyrus understood this. He had no intention of starving the city through a years-long siege like the empires before him. He chose the moment of the festival, the night when Babylon was drunk. According to Babylonian tradition and Herodotus, Belshazzar held a great feast within the city, the palace echoing with music and wine. In the warm glow of golden torches, they toasted Marduk, believing themselves eternally protected. But that same night, only miles away, Persian soldiers dug channels like men sawing through the legs of a banquet table. Persia's strategy was more than lowering the water level. The army was split into two wings, one under Cyrus guarding the main approach, and another under Gobryas, his trusted general, once the governor of Gutium, who had defected from Nabonidus to join Cyrus. Gobryas knew every route inside the city, the width of the river gates, and how to guide troops through narrow passages once the river fell. Persia's greatest advantage was not manpower, it was information. When the Euphrates dropped to knee height, Cyrus gave the order to advance. No drums, no horns, only the sound of feet sloshing in mud. The first soldiers stepping into the riverbed felt the cold water wrap around their legs like the hand of death. But they did not stop. Their shields were held high, their spears tucked close, their bows kept dry in oiled cloth. They moved like ghosts across a graveyard. On the ramparts, Babylonian guards slept leaning on their spears, some still clutching half-empty wine jars. Torches burned, but not brightly enough to reveal that below their feet, the mud had become a pathway for an invading army. Two of the river gates had not been fully closed. Only the upper water barriers were locked, while the lower sections remained open because the river had always been too deep to require sealing. No one imagined the water would vanish. No one imagined the riverbed could become a road. That was the weakness greater than any crack in stone. The Persians slipped into the city in small groups, each only a few dozen men, moving like mist through a garden. There were no shouts of attack, no pounding drums. They wrapped their weapons in dark cloth, waiting for a single signal that would unleash them like chained beasts finally set loose. Inside the palace, laughter was still curling into the domes, wine still rising in cups. Belshazzar had no idea that beneath the stone floor on which he walked, thousands of spear-carrying men were digging into the city like a forest of roots growing upward from the riverbed. And when the Persian groups gathered just beyond the gates, the wind shifted, not carrying the scent of wine anymore, but the metallic breath of bronze sliding free of its sheath. The two battle lines were now separated by only a few yards of stone. The drumbeat of fate began to quicken, each moment tightening, heating, like metal in a forge turning red. No one in Babylon knew they had only a few breaths left before the 1,000-year-old walls heard the crash of foreign armor on their floors. No one knew the feast was not a celebration of Marduk, but the final supper of a dying dynasty. And in the darkness beneath the river, Cyrus gazed upon Babylon like a predator staring at prey with its back turned. His eyes held no hatred, only the certainty of a man who knows he's about to step into history. One more step, one more breath. Rome did not yet exist. Alexander had not yet been born. But the Persian Empire was preparing to stain the world's map with the mud of the Euphrates and the winds of war. The spears of the immortals were already angled forward, their steel trembling lightly as if eager to plunge into stone hearts. And from the moment the riverbed dried to the instant the gate swung fully open, only one puff of wind was needed to turn silence into steel. Above, Babylon still slept. Beneath their feet, an army waited to push history into its next chapter like a blade laid perfectly against a throat. They did not need to attack, they only needed to step forward. And with a single step, the ancient capital would change hands as suddenly as a flame extinguished by spilled wine. The water receded, the earth emerged, and silence became the loudest drumbeat on the battlefield. There were no horns, no rows of spears glittering in the dawn, only footsteps sinking into mud, light as ghosts. The Persians did not surge like a wave. They flowed into Babylon, slipping along the Euphrates' exposed riverbed like the new current of war itself. Beneath the stone walls, figures in scale armor glinted faintly in the gold of scattered torches. As they approached the gates, their breathing no longer sounded like breath, but like the whisper of blades leaving their sheaths. Orders passed not by voice, but by eyes. Hands tightened on hilts, muscles strung taut like bowstrings drawn to their final notch. Then the gate shifted, not with the grand creak of legend, but with a soft scrape of metal against metal, like a loosened shackle. And in that quiet click, history changed color. The first wave of Cyrus's soldiers poured into the corridor leading straight into the inner city. The blue-glazed brick roads from Nebuchadnezzar's time now became the arteries through which Persian steel flowed. The immortals advanced first, their shields angled like iron turtle shells, their spears pointed forward like compass needles toward life or death. They moved fast but never chaotically, silent, disciplined, as if they had rehearsed this in their dreams. Their black-tipped spears led the way, the curved blades of their short axes catching torchlight as they slipped into side gates. Babylon still had no idea it had been cut open. On the walls, sentries still believed the river was high. In Marduk's temple, drunk revelers had yet to hear the first clang of armor. And that was the moment the sword was set perfectly against the Empire's chest. Then, like lightning ripping open a cloudless night, the first strike sounded. A Babylonian guard turned too late. A spear punched through his neck like an arrow through hide, blood spraying across the deep blue tiles of the city. The thud of his body became the bell summoning a storm that needed no wind. Persia sprang like a starving leopard, drawing short Akhenaten's daggers, stabbing close, cutting fast. Metal crashed against metal, sharp and violent, like the gong of a new era being struck. Babylon, once a sleeping tiger, was being wrenched awake by fire in its mane. Defenders spilled out of the corridors like men fleeing a burning house. Many wore no armor, their hands still smelling of wine and barley bread. Their screams blended with the ring of bronze. Torches fell, rolled across the floor, casting long, writhing shadows like souls dragged behind their bodies. The first clashes erupted in the last place they ever expected. The Euphrates itself, the river that had fed their kingdom, now turned into a silent blade slicing them open. Bodies dropped, rolling into the damp river mud, blood mixing with the last shallow pools of water. A diluted red painted by the hand of history. There was no grand battle at the main gates. No war elephants, no siege towers scraping the sky. Only close combat. So close men could hear each other breathe, smell blood as raw as hot copper. A Persian warrior thrust his spear through bronze armor, his hand trembling not with fear, but with adrenaline surging through his veins like thunder rolling through bone. A Babylonian hurled an axe. The blade tore the air and bit into a leather-wrapped shield, forcing the Persian back half a step, before the immortal behind him pressed forward, the entire formation moving as if one body with 1,000 arms. The narrow halls became steel throats where every clash was a heartbeat. No one yielded. Both sides were skilled, both trained. But only one knew this night was a checkmate long planned. Deep inside the palace, Belshazzar lifted a golden cup, the very vessel condemned in later scripture for being taken from Jerusalem's holy treasure. Wine poured thick onto the stone floor, like a false purification ritual. No warnings came. No messengers ran. Babylon believed no enemy could enter. That belief was fatal. When the first blade struck the palace floor, music died as if strangled mid-note. Torches fell, their flames bending, and the Persian roar rose like a mountain collapsing. Gobryas's detachment burst in from the north, striking the heart of the feast. No trumpets, only the metallic crash of weapons shattering goblets. Pools of spilled gold mixed with blood. Figures fell on top of each other, shadows layered like an apocalypse without lightning. Inside Nebuchadnezzar's grand hall, the battle spread from corridor to chamber. Basalt pillars trembled as Babylonian troops formed desperate shield walls, their long spears jutting out like shark teeth. But the Persian cavalry unit behind them surged forward like surf breaking a stone jetty. Horses could not gallop in the palace, but speed was irrelevant. Weight was the weapon. Marble floors cracked under iron hooves. Men toppled like reeds in a storm. Persian forces closed in from both wings, jaws of a beast snapping shut. No escape remained. Torchlight revealed scorched leather, bodies collapsing, and blood tracing patterns across designs meant for gods. The turning point arrived when Gobryas confronted Belshazzar, not in a grand duel before cheering crowds, but in a flash of steel above an unfinished banquet. Belshazzar drew a dagger, eyes reddened, wine turning to desperate fire. He lunged like a trapped animal. Gobryas slipped the blow, and the immortals behind him sealed the exit. In a few breaths, the empire changed hands. The regent king's blood soaked into the crimson banquet cloth like a coronation paid in death. Babylon fell in a single night. Not after a decade-long siege, not from battering rams or shattered walls, but from one weakness, one mistake, one river diverted. That was enough to break what claimed to be eternal. When dawn rose and sunlight struck the Ishtar gate, Persian soldiers already stood upon the walls, the winged Faravahar banner fluttering like the new spirit of the ancient land. The cries that followed were not battle cries. They were shock. For last night, Babylon was king. This morning, Babylon was ash. No thunder, no earthquake, yet that battle changed the course of Western history. The Euphrates still glistened with the mud of war, but a new empire now stood atop the old like a tree growing from a tomb. And from that moment, the gears of history shifted into a new chapter, where Persia did not merely conquer a city, but claimed an entire age. Dawn came over Babylon not with triumphant trumpets, but with a silence so heavy it felt like stone pressed against the chest of a civilization that once believed itself the center of the universe. Smoke from the night's fighting still drifted through the palace halls, the smell of drying blood mixing with the old incense of forgotten rituals, two eras breathing in the same fading air. Babylon, once the city others had to look up to, now glimmered faintly under the newborn sun, as if coated in a thin gold ash settling on chipped statues of the gods. On the ramparts, Persian soldiers stood in rows, armor shimmering like fish scales, gazing down the two banks of the Euphrates the way men look back at the wreckage of a flood they've survived. No uprisings, no clatter of weapons rising from the alleys. A city of 1,000 years had fallen in a single night, dropping into the hands of its conquerors like ripe fruit that no longer needs the wind. Material damage in Babylon was far less than in the bloody sieges of history, but the spiritual loss, no language carries words heavy enough for it. No towers toppled, no walls shattered. Most palaces and storerooms remained intact. But Babylon's immortality, that invisible shield which had guarded it for generations, shattered like pottery falling from a ziggurat onto stone. Belshazzar died at his own feast. Nabonidus was captured soon after. The people woke as if from a dream in which they had imagined themselves invincible. No Babylonian king held authority anymore. No soul still believed Marduk's protection was absolute. The fall did not come like a landslide. It came like receding water. Cyrus the Great entered the city not with fire and corpses laid as carpet, but with order. He did not burn the granaries or destroy the temples. Instead, he commanded the restoration of Marduk's sanctuary and returned the sacred idols Nabonidus had carried away, In the Cyrus cylinder, he proclaimed that every people could worship their own gods, opened the granaries to the citizens, and sent war captives home. This was not merely a military triumph. It was a political victory sharper than any spear. The terror in Babylon slowly shifted to submission, and then, astonishingly, to acceptance. Many came to see Cyrus not as a conqueror, but as a ruler sanctioned by heaven. An empire did not fall because fire consumed it. It fell because its people changed allegiance. For Persia, the victory opened a gateway so vast that the known world could hardly stretch wide enough to map it. From Babylon, Cyrus commanded all Mesopotamia, gripping the richest trade routes of the ancient age. Iran, Mesopotamia, Syria, Anatolia, now linked like the spine of a single continent. No rival dynasty remained to block Persia's lifeblood from flowing toward the Mediterranean. Only a few years later, Persia absorbed Egypt. From plateau to desert, the Faravahar standard cast its shadow over lands that had once been the brightest capitals of earlier civilizations. It was the victory of 539 BCE that transformed Persia from a rising kingdom into the first true superpower. Its reach spanning from India to the Mediterranean, the largest empire the world had yet seen. But the triumph was written not only on maps, it was carved into humanity's future. Cyrus established satrapies, a royal road, unified taxation, a reserve army, and protections for subject peoples. This was the birth of the administrative empire, not merely the conquering one. Unlike the Assyrians, who ruled by the whip and exile, Cyrus ruled by integration. He did not force his subjects to kneel. He made them want to stand beneath the Persian banner. History would remember him not only as a conqueror, but as a liberator. That title was not romantic embellishment. It was the result of his strategy, taking Babylon not by smashing walls, but by shifting the very foundation beneath them. Great civilizations that followed, Greece, Rome, borrowed from this model. 2 centuries later, Alexander the Great would arrive in Babylon and die in the very city that had once bowed to Cyrus. The world turns like a wheel of fire that never stops. Yet its axle was set that night in Babylon, when walls remained whole but the empire changed hands, when victory came without leveling a city. Afterward, the Achaemenid Empire ruled for nearly 2 centuries. Half of Asia changed its administrative language, its tax codes, its political map. Babylon, the old heart of the world, became the heart of Persia. But history never moves in only one direction. Had Babylon not held its festival that night, had the river gates been shut tight, had the Euphrates not been drained, had Cyrus failed, the political shape of the Western world and the very idea of religious freedom might have emerged in entirely different form. Persia might never have become the template for imperial governance. The Jews might never have returned to Jerusalem. Alexander might have grown up studying a different map, one where Babylon still stood proud, and the Persian voice never reached the Mediterranean. One river receded, and the world changed. If that night Babylon had been awake, if they had climbed the walls when the Euphrates sank, if they had seen Persian shadows under the torchlight, would we read history today as an entirely different story? Babylon fell in a single night, not to bombs, not to siege towers, but to a strategy thin as a blade and sharp enough to slice through the artery of an empire once believed eternal. Cyrus the Great walked through its gates not amid the roar of slaughter, but in the silence of a history that had just changed masters. And from that moment onward, the world's map stretched and tightened like a war drum. The more it was struck, the louder it rang. The Persian Empire rose not as a firestorm of destruction, but as a river that had shifted course, carrying with it new laws, new faiths, a new philosophy of rule. Babylon still stood, its walls unbroken, its blue-glazed bricks unfaded, but the soul of its power had gone elsewhere. Sometimes an empire does not need to burn to die. It only needs to sleep while another remains awake. When we look back at 539 BCE, we don't simply see a captured city. We see a lesson for every era. The invincible remains invincible only until someone learns how to open its gates, not with rams, but with water. Cyrus prevailed not because his spears were sharp, but because he saw a path where others saw only walls. And from that point on, history was no longer the story of the strong crushing the weak, but of those who could see beneath the surface, defeating those who could not. The story closes here, yet the footsteps of Persian soldiers on Babylon's glazed bricks still echo somewhere in humanity's memory. If you want to keep walking through history, watch Alexander cross the desert to overturn this empire, see Greece clash with the East, watch the fires of war shift from the Euphrates to Gaugamela. Stay. Subscribe. History never stops. It only waits for those willing to look. In the next video, we'll follow the men who toppled empires with the speed of a storm,